whereas adult-centered parenting included indifference, it included punitive behavior, it included the ignorance of the child's opinions, inconsistency. It was authoritarian or it was neglecting. Both types were seen. If we come back to this picture, the difference between compliant and constructive children was in parenting that the parents of constructive children encouraged their activities more than the parents of compliant children. So hobbies and social activities were encouraged more in the case of constructive children. And certainly there are also temperament differences. So some children are more passive, some are more active. And what was typical of the anxious children was that they had this poor parenting, I mean adult-centered parenting, but they had also these unstable life conditions. And in case of aggressive children, they had this adult-centered parenting, but they had poor relationships with the parents, and children had poor relationships. So these children tend to go and find attachment objects among their peers, among their friends, what Dr. Neufeld will speak more about. But my results already in 1982 showed this finding, and I've been wondering very much of this finding. Okay, but I showed you also another way to look at the factors that affect development. When these people were 36 years old, I was interested in their social functioning. And by social functioning, I meant career stability, drinking habits, also adjustment to society, whether there was delinquency or not in their background. And I tried to find out what are the factors in these people's lives which predict their social functioning. And at age 14, we studied many factors that we had learned from parents and from these participants, and we created an index to describe the developmental background, how favorable or unfavorable the background was. And this index was so strongly related to social functioning that you can see in the picture that if the developmental background was very favorable, there were no one whose social functioning was poor. And unfortunately, in those cases where developmental background was poor, there were no one whose social functioning was good. So there was a tendency for the accumulation of positive social functioning or poor social functioning as a function of developmental background. And what was involved in this developmental background by the age of 14? First, there was the previous development of these individuals, so that we considered the behavioral style. So if the child had developed a constructive style of coping with conflicts, then it was an important predictor of their future social functioning. But if this constructive behavior was very poor, it was a risk factor. We also looked at the child's interest in going to school. So if the interest was good, it was also a good prediction for their future. But what was most important was that family was a psychological atmosphere of the family explained most of the variance. And I used the term social capital at home. Social capital means that there is networking, there is trust, there are common rules, common norms, and at home social capital may be high or low. And if there is good relationship between the parents, it increases the social capital. If the child has a good relationship with the father, it increases the social capital. And I'm so pleased that Jonas has described this father's role in terms of 18 years. So this study shows that the father's role at the age of 14 is very important for the adult development of these individuals. It is not just the first 18 months, but it's a whole period of 18 years. And this relationship may be good even the parents have divorced, but of course it is a big risk. When the parents divorce, it's a big risk for the child-father relationship, and really demands efforts from the father's part if the child is living with the mother, that maintain the contact good. Child-centered parenting, it was mainly mother-related variable because mothers often take more care of upbringing, but in general it was at home. I mean, describe the parenting role at home. So it's a love, there are expectations, there are demands of the child, which match with the child's developmental states. There is support, there is guidance, there is no physical punishment. So this was important, and independent of this pattern, there was one, and it was the parents' controlled drinking. In Finland, drinking is a big problem, and it destroys family life, family atmosphere very much. It's a risk for children. So parents' controlled drinking is one predictor of this social functioning in adulthood. And now you may ask, where is the financial capital of the home? We included it also in this model. It didn't explain at all girls' social functioning in adulthood. No, it's a 0%. So it's a psychological atmosphere which explained. In boys it was little, it contributed a little, but just a little. And this was very interesting because in our country really economic matters are so much highlighted. There is much equality in finances. After a certain level of livelihood has been reached, then increasing income doesn't increase children's well-being. So this, okay. Now I want to say something about the factors affecting development. There's differences between 4 kinds of variables. One is called resource factor. It's a general beneficial effect on development. There are many of them. There is a good relationship between the parents. This is a general beneficial variable for the child development. But it's also child-centered parenting. Risk factors, they are predictors of problems in adaptation. many of them poor relationship with the parent, parental drinking. So protective factor means factors which reduce the effects of adversity. I mentioned about drinking, alcohol drinking, and in former times it was very common in Finland that the parents had used alcohol excessively, particularly after the Second World War. There was a big problem. Fathers who came from war had suffered, they had problems, they drank too much. But what was the protective factor? It was the mother, the caring mother, who protected the child and took care of the child. And many children, including me, I'm very grateful to my mother, because my father learned to drink in the war, and it was sometimes very difficult for the family. But the mother was a strong person who helped us children to develop. So it may be a protective factor. It may be also a grandmother who does it, or someone else. And then there are vulnerability factors. They are factors that affect, particularly in the situation when there are other risks. Let's say we talk about violent computer games, violent movies, videos, and there are people who argue it has no effect on children. But this is silly, it's rubbish. It really has a lot of influence on children, particularly if there are other risk factors already accumulated. If there is violence at home, if there is child neglect at home, then these other influences add to the total. And these are vulnerability factors. They are effective at high risk. Now we tell about one risk factor, and it is the early initiation of drinking behavior. This figure shows that kids who start drinking at age 13 or earlier, at age 42, have higher scores in alcoholism screening tests, CAGE and NMAST, they are two internationally used alcoholism tests. They drink more often and they are more often drunk. But if drinking is initiated later, at age of 16 or preferably at age 18 or later, then these indicators of alcoholism are much lower. In fact, those differences are so big that the risk for becoming an alcoholic in adulthood is 4 times higher if the child starts drinking at age 13 or younger, compared to the later initiation at age 16 at least. Compared to starting at age 18 or later. And it is 3 times higher if drinking is started at age of 16. So really postponing the start of drinking to later years reduces the risk for becoming alcoholic. And there are many reasons for this. And we have announced these results in Finland widely and strongly. And we have been able to change the situation. So now police is controlling more the early drinking behavior. And parents are more aware of these problems. Alcohol is a psychoactive substance which affects children's brain. And brain is developing up to age 25. So there are very difficult and serious problems that early use of alcohol may cause in brain, and also cause this continuation of drinking behavior. Okay.